I'm standing up for the American auto worker like no president has ever stood up before. You know, those tariffs are keeping the foreign auto workers. Now, if they want to come in and build a plant and hire you and hire your friends and your neighbors, that's great. I love that.
Here's a question for you. Will Donald Trump's trade war liberate the US car industry or destroy it? All experts agree. President Trump is seemingly willfully causing significant distress in pretty much all economic sectors, and specifically for US and international car makers selling vehicles in the United States. The president, always in a more chipper mood when surrounded by people wearing hard hats, is taking, figuratively speaking, a wrecking ball to US automobile producers and importers, slamming them with hefty tariffs.
Why does Donald Trump do it? What do the experts think? And what is the real reason for the Trump administration to put those tariffs onto the car industry? Donald Trump, President of the United States. He had promised as much, and now he follows through. And somehow nobody in the auto industry, or most of them, didn't believe him.
Let's rewind for a moment. It's April 2nd, 2025, a sunny spring day in Washington, D.C. and a big event at the White House. Donald Trump announces an expensive new slate of tariffs. The president lays out the most significant US tariffs increase in nearly a century, hitting roughly 60-plus countries and trading blocs. The aim? Trump wants new trade deals with, well, everybody. Trump calls it Liberation Day.
April 2nd, 2020. We're standing up for the American worker, and we are finally putting America first.
But most people, many not part of his administration, seem rather confused about the liberating aspect of the new tariffs for American consumers and businesses. There's also confusion about the allegedly funky math that went into Trump tariffs calculations for each country. And perhaps expected, the markets don't take it so well. The result? Trump chickens out.
Trump chickened out.
Just a week after, the White House announces that the country-specific Reciprocal Liberation Day tariffs would be paused for 90 days.
I did a 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate.
Again, widespread confusion all around, but also, naturally, a sense of relief, at least temporarily. With one exception. That sense of relief is nowhere to be found in the US automobile manufacturing sector. Why? The so-called Detroit Big Three, GM, Ford and Stellantis, formerly Chrysler, and also all other foreign car manufacturers active in the US, had already started to pay a new set of tariffs in March, even if these were later temporarily paused. A 25% tariff on all passenger vehicles, trucks and SUVs imported into the US, plus another 25% tariff on imported automotive parts, including engines, transmissions and electrical components, had hit the industry hard. That, of course, made carmaker CEOs, well, sad. And left them wondering why they don't get a substantial tariff pause or rollback. And what about the 25% tariff on steel and aluminum the president had also announced? Cars need both, and lots of it. Are these tariffs extra? Or had Trump scratched, paused, halted, or perhaps just forgotten about them? For most auto industry CEOs and CFOs, for many market and business insiders, these early days of the president's tariffs regime have been, well, rough.
It's maximum uncertainty.
In response to the mess, the whole car manufacturing sector, domestic and international, began an advertising offensive. The massive lobbying blitz by car makers pays off somewhat, and at least for some time. The 25% tariff on US-sourced car parts imports from Canada and Mexico is paused for a while, as both countries are covered by the USMCA Free Trade Agreement. Used car import tariffs and car parts not cataloged and regulated by the USMCA remain at 25% though. Keeping track of all things tariffs got, let's say, challenging, even for experts like the policy and market observers at the nonpartisan CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington.
How difficult and unnerving it is, perhaps for you, for me it is, to keep track on everything.
They change every week, they change every few days, and I think everybody's confused and it's hard to keep up.
Broadly, and in the end, the US market automakers largely ended up paying a 25% tariff on imported new cars since April and 25% on imported automotive parts since May. The only bright spot, tariffs on US-sourced cars and parts from Mexico and Canada, had been paused in March for a while. And car makers didn't have to pay tariffs on steel and aluminum. Plus, for some tariffs paid on specific vehicles and some parts, the US Treasury Department meant to issue small, very small refunds over the next 2 years. Right, that sounds messy, and it creates problems.
You're thinking about making a substantial investment here, and a new auto manufacturing plant would be a substantial investment. If you don't know that the situation is going to be the same 3 weeks from now, or 3 months from now, much less 4 years from now, you're going to be very careful in deciding where to make an investment.
We will put tariffs on every product you do send in of 100% or more.
In fact, Donald Trump had promised tariffs all along. In the White House, he implements them quickly, with a bang, then pauses them briefly, modifies them, then implements them again, and always threatens even more and worse to come. Tactics? Plan? Strategy? Or is Trump just winging it? One way or another, all that translates into a scenario that feels somewhat like a never-ending roller coaster ride for the entire US automobile industry and for car makers as they look back on many brutal months of uncertainty and pain. The problem with this is, of course, in capitalism, in a consumer-driven world, in any economy, and therefore for any consumer and business, uncertainty has consequences, and most of them are not good. Short and long-term uncertainty is not good for any business that needs a relatively long time to set up and secure complex supply chains and production lines in order to then be able to sell on scale.
I think the other issue is, even if you do, as you mentioned, it's timing. The best example that I've run into is Stellantis announced last year that they were going to reopen a plant in Illinois that they had closed. But the start date for that is 2027. So this is a plant that is already built, already there, permitting, zoning, all those problems addressed. It's there now. Retooling alone is going to take 3 years. Why anybody thinks that you can start from scratch and develop something in 1 or 2 years is absurd. You know, it simply is going to take longer than this.
These are not the only challenges. Until now, US market car makers largely paid and absorbed the higher costs caused by Trump's tariffs for the new cars they imported and for the parts they needed to build and or assemble their vehicles and sell them in the US marketplace. But that cannot and will not last forever. Consumers are already paying extra and will end up paying even more. And that will potentially impact demand and overall prosperity negatively. The bottom line is, big questions linger. Clarity is scarce, and seemingly nobody really knows anything anymore as things in the Trump's tariff world are constantly evolving.
The uncertainty translates to, definitely a hesitance and a kind of an economic cooling, I would say, just because people don't know what's coming. They don't know if their jobs are going to be affected. And then of course there's other repercussions with regard to vehicle sales and used vehicle sales and, all kinds of other offshoots of what's going on currently with tariffs. So it's definitely I hate to use the word chaotic.
US car industry and every player on the US market had a good few years indeed. They made money, they sold cars. Nobody asked for tariffs.
After 6 months plus of caution, uncertainty and chaos for the industry, thanks to Trump's "we have a deal, we don't have a deal, we might have a deal" flip-flops, there are now at least some country and trading bloc-specific trade and tariff deals in place. Well, at least it seems so for the time being. Japan and Europe settled with Donald Trump. Nippon's car makers like Toyota, Honda, Mitsubishi, Mazda, Subaru and Nissan must now only pay a reduced 15% rate on their new car and car parts imports into the US. The same goes for European car makers like Fiat and Renault, and for the Germans Mercedes, BMW, VW, Audi and Porsche. German engineering at a discount? Not really. South Korean car makers like Hyundai and Kia were also spared from worse. Both also have car assembly plants in the US, but still import quite a lot of new vehicles and parts. It's a more lenient 15% tariff for them too. Of course, for all these car companies, that is still worse than the single-digit tariffs rates they paid in a pre-Trump era. But it is also still better than what they already had been paying since April 2025. And better than the rates they were threatened with if no country-specific trade deals would have been reached with the US. So far, so good? Well, not so much for Mexico and Canada. The two neighbors, close friends and allies, failed to negotiate lower, more manageable tariffs with the US. No final deals yet. However, in terms of a trade deal with Mexico, President Donald Trump pulled another taco. TACO stands for Trump always chickens out. At the 11th hour, just a day before the August 1st super firm and final deadline for any deal to be made with him, Mexico received a 90-day negotiating extension from the president. The border situation had something to do with it, Trump adds, but he doesn't offer any additional information or details. Perhaps the fact that Mexico is the largest trading partner of the United States was a factor also. In 2024, total trade between the two countries reached a record $840 billion. However, let's not forget that this just means that non-USMCA compliant auto imports from Mexico continue to be tariffed with 25%. The consequences? Ford increased the sticker prices for US models like the Maverick and Bronco Sport that it imports from Mexico in May already. Prices went up about $2,000 for both. Fun fact, that happened just days after executives said on television they didn't expect significant increases in industry-wide car prices this year due to Trump's tariffs. Embarrassing? Oh well, we all make mistakes, right? GM and Stellantis are in a similar squeeze. GM's Chevrolet Equinox and Blazer SUVs sold in the US are imported from Mexico. Their sticker price went also up some already. And now, the 90 days pause on higher tariffs given to the US southern neighbor Mexico ended. A 25% tariff is back in effect, with still no final deal in sight. Stay tuned for, well, who knows what. And that leaves us with Canada. For the US neighbor to the north, things look even a bit more dire. Like Mexico, Canada is a member of the so-called USMCA Free Trade Agreement, which guarantees favorable trade and import tariffs terms that supposedly also include the automobile sector. Fun fact, the USMCA was negotiated by the president during his first term in office, replacing NAFTA. However, in May 2025, during the first visit by Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney to the White House, President Trump let the US ally and friend have it.
Subsidizing Canada to the tune of maybe $200 billion a year.
Just for the record, Canada bought US goods worth upwards of $350 billion in 2024.
We want to make our own cars. We don't really want cars from Canada.
Oh well, Carney countered with, Canada is not selling any Canadian cars to the US, but
with 25% tariffs on all vehicles imported from the United States that are not compliant with CUSMA, our North American Free Trade Agreement.
Why? Because the big three in Detroit and other car makers in the US produce or assemble many of their vehicles for the US market in, yes, Canada. That made economic sense before Trump 2.0. Before now. A harsh new reality for US automobile manufacturers, equal opportunity suffering for the automotive parts sector. Meet Bruce Lane. His company makes car parts that, before ultimately ending up in new cars in the US, cross the US-Canada border back and forth several times for treatment and processing during several stages of manufacturing. With Trump's new tariffs in place, both non-USMCA compliant car parts and vehicles produced and assembled in Canada crossing the border to the US and back multiple times is tricky, and this has the Canadian manufacturer worried.
I worry for my grandchildren's futures, my children's futures. I just worry that it's going to be a knock on the economy and there can be a lot of people affected by it.
That includes American car makers. They are bleeding money paying tariffs right now. That money goes into the federal treasury. That's good for the government perhaps, but bad for the car makers themselves. Yeah, let's talk money. In July 2025, in just 1 month, the US government collected nearly $30 billion in tariff revenue according to the US Treasury Department. Since April 2025, when it all started, until the end of 2025, the US will have collected a total of between $195 and $258 billion in tariff revenue. An estimated $30 billion of that, at least, comes from automotive tariff obligations. Good for the federal treasury, yes, but perhaps bad for the US economy overall, as part of their revenue gets sucked out of the US automobile sector, out of the US and other car companies' profits. On many of their balance sheets, red flags are popping up right, left, and center. Let's do some more numbers. General Motors, or GM, the largest automaker in the US, sees its net income shrink by 35% in the second quarter of 2025, with Trump's tariffs hitting GM's operating income by $1.1 billion in that same timeframe, meaning less profit for the Detroit staple. GM's management had announced earlier that it expects Trump's tariffs to add total costs of between $4 and $5 billion for the company. Stellantis, formerly Fiat Chrysler, warns of a $2.7 billion loss in the first half of 2025, largely due to tariffs, and Ford expects adjusted earnings will fall by as much as 36%, a negative net impact of $2 billion in 2025 due to the tariffs. And that is, we remember, besides having already increased prices for some models. All US car makers expect layoffs or have laid off some workers already, at least temporarily. And even the world's biggest car manufacturer, Toyota, forecasts a 21% decline in profits for the current financial year. Tariffs reduced its operating profit by around $3 billion in the first half of 2025. And so the story goes for other car makers from near and far selling their vehicles in the US. Major downturns in revenue and a sharp decline in profits have either already occurred or are on the horizon. The financial impact of the Trump tariffs on European car makers, here specifically German brands like VW, Audi, Porsche, BMW and Mercedes-Benz, is equally adverse. It prompted their executives to engage in a corporate travel frenzy to the US, all pleading for mercy. All that lobbying is done hush-hush. And even though Mercedes, VW and BMW already produce and assemble cars in Alabama, Tennessee and South Carolina, it is all for nothing and to no avail. Take VW. The global player made 1.3 billion euros less in the first half of 2025 due to Trump's tariffs alone. It lowered its 2025 outlook because duties hit its Porsche and Audi brands specifically hard, since Porsches and Audis sold in the US are imported. However, most car companies active in the US market absorb the extra costs as best as they can for as long as they are willing. But again, sooner rather than later, they are likely to forward at least a significant part of these costs on to the American consumer. There are various worst-case estimates out there that indicate Americans in the market for a new car will have to shell out approximately between $7,000 and $10,000 more soon. Best case scenarios project extra costs between $2,000 and $4,000 on top of current car prices that are already sky high. Add to that rising fears that Trump's tariff regime will diminish US carmakers' power of innovation and their ability to compete with other manufacturers. Plus, worries grow about the overall negative impact on the purchasing power of the American customer. Not good for the US economy. Will tariffs cause the US to lose economic agility?
So why is Donald Trump so keen on slapping tariffs on the automotive industry? For what reason does he do it?
Trump's tariffs serve today's battle cry of onshoring, bringing every industry and business sector back home and rebuild the former glory and power for America's carmaker royalty. This truly seems to be the main motivation for Trump's trade and tariff bonanza. The bottom line, Donald Trump believes in his plan. Through his tariff policies, he hopes to rebuild the US automobile industry, plus the US steel, aluminum, and other industrial sectors. He wants to remake them into modern versions of what they once were.
He's ready to negotiate a deal.
There is one argument the Trump administration makes, and that is national security. What kind of national security scenario are we looking at or are fearing here?
Real-world problems with Trump's big plan. For Donald Trump, the greatest enemy and threat to not only the US automobile sector, but also to overall US economic prosperity and dominance is China. China pretty much controls the resources and production, the supply and value chain when it comes to batteries used in EVs around the globe. In 3 categories of critical minerals, the US depends at 95 to 100% on China. In another 4th category, 50%. In the auto world, just think about the threat potential for US car makers that China poses in all things EVs. The name of one, if not the most formidable opponent in the electrical vehicle sector, BYD. China spent a massive amount of money on their EV ambitions, dwarfing investments made by anyone else in the world. Over more than a decade, China invested $230.8 billion to develop its electric car might and infrastructure. One more time, that's $230.8 billion. Electrical vehicles made by US manufacturers, and yes, that includes Tesla, are hardly competition anymore. Perhaps not just when it comes to price. Ergo, Detroit and Washington want to keep China out. Period.
So welcome to the trenches in the trade war between the US and China. The US is really concerned about Chinese companies like BYD, for example, setting up shop in Mexico, over there in Tijuana or anywhere else in Mexico, and then using the US-Canada-Mexico trade agreement as a way to import their products, their cars, into the US.
The Chinese are slapped with EV tariffs of 100%. For the time being, no Chinese EVs will enter the US market. Not all, but many Americans see the logic behind and the need for this particular move. Additionally, tariffs, now levied even on allies and friends like South Korea, Japan, Europe, Canada, and many others, are a must for Trump to restore US manufacturing and resources processing power. To them, all of it is a mere necessity to secure a United States victory and triumph over its adversary number one in tomorrow's fight for global economic dominance and military superiority.
We're heading into a very difficult economic period that will be very hard to recover from, because if they're wrong, it's because trust and confidence in us has been lost. And you don't just restore that by getting rid of the tariffs, because that is, again, policy instability. You know, it will take a long time to build that back.
Since coming into office and until August 2025, Donald Trump's tariff war has already inflicted losses on global automakers worth almost $12 billion and counting, according to a Wall Street Journal tally. Trump's promise that his tariffs will ultimately reshore US companies and revive American manufacturing has not been fulfilled yet. On the contrary, economic activity tied to manufacturing has shrunk for the most of his second term. From March to July, US manufacturing activity contracted. And finally, US consumers, they will now face and pay an overall effective tariff rate of 18.3%. The highest rate since 1934, according to the Budget Lab website at Yale University. One more time, the effective average tariff rate on all imported goods stands at roughly 18% now, versus 2.3% the year before. Most experts agree this will have a negative impact on consumption and, with that, on the US economy overall. If all of that is not bad or scary enough, well, experts say it's probably just the beginning of, well, who knows? Only time will tell.